media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. A reminder to all delegates that are appearing before committee today, please be advised that pursuant to Section 5.11, Sub 6 of City of Hamilton Procedural Bylaw 14-300, a delegation shall be limited to a presentation of not more than 5 minutes. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to our agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there's one change. Item 4.2, a delegation request from Millgrove Public School respecting a food recovery program has been withdrawn and transferred to the Board of Health June 19th meeting.
Thank you. May I please have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Councillor Farr, Councillor Green, all in favor? Thank you. Any declarations of interest? I see none. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes of our May 18th, 2017 ECS meeting as presented? Councillor Green and Councillor Marula, all in favor? Thank you. Item 4.1 is a delegation request. Oh, pardon me. No, I am at the right place. Item 4.1 is a delegation request from Azim Kassam, Icasa Hospitality, Inc. This is respecting a request for incentives for building new affordable rental housing at 210 Main Street East. The request is for today's meeting. What is the wish of committee? Moved by Farr, seconded by Skelly. All in favor? Carried. 5.1 are the minutes of our Seniors Advisory Committee. Motion to receive. Thank you, Councillor Jackson, and seconded by Councillor Green. All in favor? Carried. 5.2 are minutes of our Veterans Committee. Motion to receive from Councillor Marula and Councillor Skelly. All in favor? Carried. 6.1 is a delegation from Azim Kassam, and I do hope I'm pronouncing that right. Please forgive my mispronunciation if I'm mispronouncing. Azim is of Icasa Hospitality, Inc. His delegation is respecting a request for incentives for building new affordable rental housing at 210 Main Street East. Azim, could you please come forward? Indeed, yes. Sam.
Good afternoon.
Chair for one second.
Good afternoon, councillors and Mr. Speaker. May I start?
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, start. All okay with that slide? Thank you.
You can start your presentation anytime, sir.
Sorry?
You can start your presentation anytime.
Okay. So, is everybody okay with this slide? Would you like me to read forward? Yeah, read this slide. Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay. It's regarding affordable rental housing, city and developers partnering together. Request for incentives, 210 Main Street East. Partnership, city and developers, requesting assistance from the City of Hamilton in the form of incentives to build new affordable housing, great opportunity for all, increasing demand for affordable housing, ideal timing, prime location, affordability and market rents, increased need for affordable rental housing in the City of Hamilton. Support through incentives allows for the project to be viable while maintaining affordable rents. Unit size, studio, proposed rents, which are as per the city housing guidelines, $813. Market rents as per the appraisal done in May 2017, $950. One bedroom, city rents $1,041, market rents $1,250. Two bedroom, $1,288 city rents, market rents $1,450. Three bedrooms, city rents $1,542, market rents $1,800. 210 project details current. 210 Main Street East, corner of Main and Spring Street, closest major intersection, Main and Wellington, existing location of Days in Hamilton. Project details, current shows the picture of the map. Project details, future newly constructed building, purpose-built affordable rental housing, energy efficient, amenities, laundry on each floor, bicycle friendly, landscape terrace, etc. will meet accessibility requirements. Couple of items we forgot to add in there, mostly for seniors and a non-smoking building. Project details, future, size of development, 15-story, studio 14, 1 bedroom 140, 2 bedrooms 66, 3 bedrooms 4 units, total 224 units. Cost to build the project, $36 million. This is the rendering of how the building would look when it's finished. This is one of the floor plans, the third floor, where the tenants would be able to go to the landscape area on the deck there. Incentive request, waiver of 100% development charge exemption. We already qualify for 75% from the downtown and community renewal incentive. Approximately, with a 75% discount, would be 1.1 million value. Parkland dedication exemption would be approximately 125,000 value. Tax incentives for 15 years, approximately $4 million based on present value. That is after deduction of the downtown CIP waivers. Building permit fee waiver, approximately 280,000 value. Project details, progress thus far. Consulted with various city staff and departments. Ward Councillor Jason Farr. Housing Services Division staff. Urban Design Committee. Floor plans and drawings completed. Design committee review completed. Just received CMS's seed funding approval for affordable housing, approximately 50,000. Site plan application submitted. Development and construction team in place. Conclusion, requesting assistance from the City of Hamilton in the form of incentives to build new affordable housing. Great opportunity for city and developers to partner together and tackle the affordable housing crisis. Incentives allow the project to be viable with affordable rents. Without incentives, either higher rents need to be charged or the project as a whole is not viable. And that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kassam.
You're welcome.
Very good. We should do questions first, right? Just clarifying process. Thank you. So I do have a speakers list. It consists right now only of Councillor Farr and then of Councillor Green. So Councillor Farr, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Zim and I go way back, probably from the first year I got elected. He's done a few projects in the ward, and certainly this one is exciting and unique. I think this is probably the first time we ever received a delegation, at least in my 7 or so years, or close to 7 years, where a private developer has come up and said, I'm interested in tackling an issue that we're all very interested in tackling. However, he's presented here, obviously, ways in which it makes sense for his own pro forma. And so if you could turn to your slide of what you're asking for, I forgot, I think it was 8 or slide 7, where you had the 100% DC.
Yeah, that's where it is now.
There you go, 10, he was already there. Oh, wow. Zim, through you, Chair. So to date, we've had these discussions informally. Is it your objective here today, through this appropriate committee, as we've discussed in the past, as a delegate, for us to formally request that staff investigate ways in which we can work together on this?
I'll appreciate that, please.
Right. And so understanding that you're a long way into the process as it is from a planning standpoint, You've been to, through you, Chair, Urban Design Committee.
Yes.
There's been variations from your original plan. Can you discuss what they may have been?
Well, through the urban design, we were first planning, it was a massive building. So they request us to make a change instead of a U-shaped building to go like an L-shaped building, which we have done now. So as far as the urban design situation goes from the perspective of the shape of the building, that's all been taken care of. Mm-hmm. So that's all been done.
Right. And through you, based on advice you received from expert planners and
yes,
urban design
correct.
Teams? Okay. So just a few more questions here. Quality, affordable housing. We always preface quality before your affordable housing. And I noticed in your presentation, this is the one thing we haven't reviewed over our time together. You took quality out, but when you look at the amenities that you're offering, you would suggest that this is something that offers quality and affordable housing through you, Chair?
Correct. We were debating to put quality because since coming to the public, we decided maybe we could offend some other developers by putting that word developers. So on a one-to-one basis, we can say that, but we didn't want to offend anybody by saying that, hey, look, we are the superior guys.
Okay.
So that's why.
Can you go back to the slide on the city guidelines and how you're adhering to them as it relates to affordability? These are our latest numbers from May 2017. I believe you had there it is. No. There you go. Through you, Chair. It's still pretty pricey for rent, and I know these are our guidelines with the formula we use. Is there, if we were to contemplate somewhere down the road, because I intend to just move, hopefully, and be supported on moving this to referring this to staff, which would ensure that at some point down the road, Azim could come back with his project team, his planners, other folks that he's working with, and hear what staff have to say with respect to a formal report. But is there room to maneuver if we were to contemplate the 100% DCs where you get 75% now, waiving the parkland dedications, your tax incentive ask, 15 years, and the building permit waiver? Would you contemplate working on in some ways, even reducing some of those proposed rents, or are you, with your performer now, are you built into what you're asking for? Are they tied together through you, Chair?
We did some calculations on our own. I have some pages away if you would like to see it. Based on the market rents to the city rents, if we did the calculation over a period of 15 years, even with the whatever incentives that we are requesting, we would be, over a period of 15 years, we'll be at a loss of about $1.5 to $2 million if we went on market rents. Mm-hmm. That is not taking into consideration every year 1.5 to 2% rent increases as per the province guideline. Mm-hmm. So doing those numbers on 15 years, with the market rents, with the current city incentives of 75% whatever, and with this city rents that we are proposing, if we did this all over a period of 15 years, okay, we will be, between the two things, we'd be losing almost $1.5 to $2 million. It would be a loss to us, kind of, as developers. But since there's a demand for affordable housing, we would like to go ahead with it if it's possible.
Understood. And you also understand, too, in our previous conversations through you, Chair, that this would be, if we were to move forward, excuse me, and more of probably a planning committee or even a GIC would be the ultimate decision. We would look at this as a template. This wouldn't be a one-off. You understand that it's the kind of thing that we would want to use as a template for future, hopefully inspiring future private developers like yourself to follow up on as well.
Correct, yes.
Okay. The amenities. So this almost comes off like a condominium, almost. Certainly something that, have you also built into what you're offering here in terms of your amenities with respect to this 16 stories, right?
15.
15-story building, as of right, through you, Chair, into your performa as well? Does that all work part and parcel? If we contemplate and approve 100% DCs, the parkland dedication, yes, and all that, that makes all of that possible as well? Well,
we have on the ground floor recreation amenities like community room or something like that, we have it on the ground floor. It's included in part of the package anyway. And there'll be some section of the retail as well, like a hair salon or something. But there would be, quite a large space for having meetings or community gathering for the tenants, as well as like a fitness room, exercise room and that. And there would be a lot of covered parking as well as like, special accessible parkings as well. It's all there.
The non-smoking is a nice, we
Thank
talked
you.
about that a few years ago.
Thanks.
Zim and I have been at this for quite some time, probably 3 years, I'd say now. So it's kind of refreshing to see him up here sharing what we've been dealing with. Kirsten's been amazing, and Dave's been great, and many staff over informal meetings. But it's great to get him here. So that's why I'm taking a bit of time, because you deserve it. And your presentation was more, you were just reading the words, but you're the kind of guy who likes to improvise, so I'm giving you that opportunity too. But I finally want to, the first question I think I asked you was, well, what's in it for you? And the second question I asked you was, well, if we do all that, how are we going to be assured that this will be a building for all time that is quality, affordable housing? So through you, Chair, can you explain that answer to me? How do we have the peace of mind if we were to move forward after a staff report, if it's approved here today, that staff report back to us? How are we assured that this remains, just like our City Housing Hamilton buildings, affordable housing for all time?
Well, to my understanding, I think, at least 15 years we would be on the title that we wouldn't be able to sell the property to anybody else. We'll be maintaining it ourselves, and it would be as affordable housing. Okay. Apart from that, what else can I tell you?
Well, if there's a willingness from you, is there a willingness from you if we were to say there's a deed? If you want this deal,
yes,
that would be a template for others that maybe is tweaked over time. Is there a deed that we can say beyond 15 years that even if you were to sell the building, it should remain through deed an affordable building?
Yeah, we can work that out, sure. Because I know that some municipalities like Toronto and Cambridge, they're going up to 20 years by giving those incentives. They're going up to 20 years, and I'm sure that we could put on the title on that basis that that can be done, right? But on the other hand, it would be nice to have some sort of a leeway maybe after 20 years that as developers, if we can get a buyer, right, so as to we can develop other projects as well. It would be appreciated if it's looked into that sense.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and certainly also appreciate this as a follow-up to our past community emergency services approaches to affordable housing. And I'm sure members of this committee have probably heard me ad nauseum talking about the complexity of housing and different potential tools that we can use. Mr. Chasm, you and I had a chance to meet and talk about opportunities in Ward 3, but if I could follow from where Councillor Farr left off, what I've heard in your 15-year kind of deferred tax schedule with the suite of incentives that you've put forward, coupled with the ability to resell, it's really a long-term financing strategy is what you've come to us with that would allow the city to defer many of your fees for a future sale, which is, I think, part of the problem of our current housing strategies, both at the municipal level as well as the provincial level. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Chasm, you have in your list of people that you have met with, CMHC and others, who've come to the table with substantially, relatively small dollars, seed funding and so on and so forth. Are you really checking out all the different opportunities with the Federal Infrastructure Bank and what the feds are doing? Have you followed that? We had this conversation. I'm going to ask you again in terms of what other levels of government are you approaching to get funding for this project?
To what I've been told from federal aspect and even from provincial aspect, it's a CMHC, because recently, only a few weeks back, CMHC has changed their policies for rental apartments construction, especially affordable housing. So that is going through there. This seed funding is a small amount because they're willing to give a larger amount, but it would go on the title. So we didn't want to go with that. This one even, we were not going to go, but because the process was started, so we were encouraged to go for this 50,000 seed funding. We are way ahead with it. We have done a lot of plans and everything. So to come to your answer, it's from the federal and provincial, CMHC is the only source to go through. Now, however, reading in the media and whatnot, both the province and federal have mentioned that they have allocated funds for affordable housing to municipalities. What it is, I don't know. You guys know better.
Well, no, I'm asking the same question myself as we have this conversation because, you know, the Fed's making an announcement of a third tranche of like $12 billion of this infrastructure bank, some of which will go to social infrastructure. I've heard Minister Yves Duclos speak on this, and I've traveled with him and know that what they're saying, and I'm still waiting to see it. And so the challenge that I have through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Chasm, and you'll hear recommendations on housing, is that this idea of kind of a privatized approach to building leaves us with uncertainty at the end of the day for both the taxpayer and the folks that are seeking out affordability. So you'll hear in future reports when we talk about what it is, how do we define affordability. I appreciate that you've come in with proposed rents that are under 100% of what the market rents, because we'll have people out there even asking for more than that. So I do appreciate that you've done that. But in your suite of incentives, very astute businessman, Mr. Chair, this is our first look at it, and I see that you're really aggressive in terms of what are the potentials, and I'm sure staff will come back in coordination with our ECDEV department in terms of what's viable. But are you asserting that if this suite of incentives, this is the only way through your calculation this project is feasible?
For now, yes, that's the only way because of the, to go affordable housing. I mean, going market rents, it could be doable, or maybe sell it to another developer who may come in and go build as condos or student housing.
Okay.
We've been approached by 2 or 3 developers, but we are saying, since, as Councillor Farr mentioned, we've been discussing this thing for some time, even with Kirsten. So to respect all that, we are saying that no, if we can work out with the city together, it would be great if it can be worked out, because that will be a template, something that other developers, private developers could seriously think about it as to, okay, the city is flexible, let's look into it.
Sure, but the city also, as you know, it can't run deficits, and we count on our revenues, and a big part of our revenues come from building permits and all of the requests that you have listed here. And you have $6 million in municipal contribution and $50,000 from the feds. It's a bit lopsided, and so it's not to your project, but it's one that you'll hear me, just so that we're open and clear, being very critical of in terms of what they're expecting the municipal tax base to cover on the housing strategy, when, as Councilor Maroulas and others who have been saying ad nauseum, not only the downloading, but property tax is a form of regressive taxation, where in fact the people who are going to be paying for this are the ones who are oftentimes most vulnerable. So I appreciate this. I look forward to staff coming back. Staff know that I have a very keen interest in how we do this, and my fear, I'm going to tell you, what I'm not comfortable with right now, is if we create a template that ties us into kind of this privatized approach to housing as our major entry point. You can see that we're essentially like a sixth partner equity in your project. We're contributing $6 million, your project's $36 million, and so that's heavy for a municipality. And I just want to make sure, from a bang for the buck type perspective, that we're getting the most out of it. And I also want to make sure there's perpetuity, because I'm not interested in long-term financing for projects that are in 15 years going to turn over to condos and displace people and just send us back in the same spot. So those are my comments, and I certainly look forward to hearing what staff have to say, and looking forward to the federal government finally coming forward with a clear national housing strategy that doubles down on these types of investments to make it feasible for investors. Because if they want to bring forward a neoliberal strategy, Mr. Chair, and privatize and commodify people's lives, fine. They better come with some money too. Thank you.
Okay, if I may,
Yes,
Mr. Chair, if I may answer Councillor Green, please.
Yes,
we
please
did,
go
we
ahead.
did some numbers according to what the current, the city taxes and that are. For 15 years, based on a $30 million assessment, and with the municipal tax waivers on the CIP, the property taxes would be $4 million, okay, and development fee waiver about 1.1 in the Parkland. So overall, it would be 5.3. But as on market rents for 15 years, it total comes to 7.7 million. So there's a difference of about $2 million that we are losing as developers based on affordable housing. So if we went with market rental, now yes, we could be told we are stupid, why we're going that. But we see the need for affordable housing, and with all due respect, Councillor Farr and Kirsten have been talking to me for so long. So if it is doable, fine. If not, then we'll figure out something else.
Sure, and I don't want him leaving to think that by any means do I think that he's stupid. He's very astute, through you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate where you're going with this. And this is not about your project. This is about how government deals with housing.
Sure.
And whether or not it makes sense, and how we're using these approaches to put units online. That's all. That's the
But
only
then,
place.
how about the other like Toronto and Cambridge and that? How are they doing it?
They're not.
They
People
are.
from Toronto are moving to Hamilton. That's what's happening.
No, I agree, but I'm just saying that something maybe if the city is interested in affordable housing with private developers is something that would be beneficial to all the parties. But yeah, you got to do your homework, and that's accepted, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Green has no further questions. Thank you, Councillor Green. Next on my list is Councillor Jackson. Councillor, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Kassam?
Yes, sir.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you, sir.
Thank you. So forgive me if I ask some questions in my own words, just to fully understand your proposal.
Sure.
So Ekasa Hospitality, Inc., that's you?
Yes, sir.
So you are a for-profit company, Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Kassam?
Sure.
You are, okay. Can I ask, have you done other projects in our city? And forgive my ignorance if you have.
Yes, sir. The next to BMO, the 7-story building, brick and that came up very fast. In 6 months, the structure was up, which everybody was surprised by. That was done by me.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And to go further, sorry, in
Yes.
2007, when nobody was doing any development in downtown Hamilton, we were the first one that we took over the car dealership at Main and Spring and converted it into a 60-room hotel. Nobody was doing any work in downtown. We were the first ones.
Right, that was just at the time of the recession that we were all
Correct.
going through, correct?
Correct.
So thank you for that investment.
You're welcome.
For those investments. What's your proposed height of this building if it goes ahead?
It's 15 stories under the bylaw. code.
15 stories.
Yes.
Well, Councillor Farr is going to have interesting, lot of potential taller buildings in the downtown. Are you targeting, Mr. Kassam, with your development, are you targeting a particular demographic and or cultural group, Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Kassam?
No, like I mentioned, the intention is first priority, obviously, to try and see if there are seniors who are looking for affordable and non-smokers.
So not necessarily a particular ethno-cultural,
No.
as we have often across our community, which are good for those particular linguistic communities. They have their own, if you will,
No.
affordable housing complexes. That's not what
No.
this is about.
No.
Okay.
No.
Put up, if you will, that slide 10, is it, Mr. Kassam, the one with the financials?
Okay.
Move ahead the other way, please. I think it's number 10 you've got here in my booklet here. No, the other way. The other way, please. Slide number 10. Yep, keep going. And there.
Okay.
So if I add all that up, Mr. Chairman, that's about 5.5 million. That's what your ideal request is of the municipality, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, that's our request. Yes, please. Over a period of 15 years.
And And you've had these ongoing discussions with city staff and the ward councillor, and they're all aware of these numbers up to now?
Yes.
Okay, if any of these components do not come to fruition, is the project in jeopardy, Mr. Chairman, through you?
Depends upon what's the amount, which way it is going, then we can look at it.
Okay, those are all my questions for now. Thanks, Mr. Kassam. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Second time, Councillor Farr.
Thank you. How many folks would have an opportunity to live here? I know you've got the 60 some odd 2 bedrooms, a number of 3 bedrooms. So it's not just one person per unit. How many, if this were to fly?
14 would be like, could be one person or could be a couple because it's a studio.
So give or take, what do you think approximately, how many people would we be servicing, understanding that we've been talking about this a long time, about
If you look
the
at
crisis as it relates to
roughly
affordable housing?
224 times for about, I would say with each head you are talking about, or are you talking about a couple, or how you, what's your question,
Just
Councillor?
approximately how many people will be under this roof?
406, maybe about 600-700 people to my rough estimation.
And I think we have closing in on just over 6,000 people on the wait list right now. Is that right, Dave? 6,000, wow. Well, you'd be putting a dent in our issue, that's for sure. And if this were to all be magically sorted out and worked out and ultimately ratified by council somewhere down the line for that $5 million price tag. That said, understanding that other people like Councillor Marula, who just 3 or 4 days ago was looking to, in fact, successfully moved a motion for us to recognize that if we want to get private people to make these investments and tackle this crisis, we need to think creatively and specific to our vacant building rebate, which it looks as if at council on Wednesday, we're going to ex-nay and see 1.5 to 2 million annualized, possibly go towards that, which could possibly be one of the funding sources to make this a reality. I'm just thinking well ahead. Then, you know, I'm grateful that we have people like Councillor Marula making motions like that, so we can have that debate during the budget process. So that said, also, and I very much agree with Councillor Green. I had a chance actually to sit with the Parliamentary Secretary for the Ministry of Family and Children and Social Development while I was at FCM. So Adam Vaughan of Spadina in Toronto, who's a very smart man when it comes to these things. And I believe, Councillor Green, but I'll get it confirmed with you in the next few hours, but the Infrastructure Bank, I believe, the announcement on how that will play out comes this fall. Not absolutely certain. We talked about a lot of things, but I'm pretty sure he said this fall. So I can tell you from past meetings as well, I've had similar themes with Azim saying we couldn't possibly do this all by ourselves as a municipality. And you understand that, and you've been quite aggressive. And I'm surprised that it's just CMHC so far, but he has more knowledge than he's letting on about what's going on in neighboring communities as they address this and work with private people as well. So all I wanted to do was share that. Move a motion at the appropriate time. I know Councillor Green just chimed in again, so if you can come back to me with that motion and just say sincerely that I hope this gentleman before us, because I've met with him enough times now, gets the same kind of attention that Brad Lamb's been getting recently in the media, because he's a lot farther along than Mr. Lamb.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Farr.
Thank you, Councillor Farr. Second time, Councillor Green.
I heard 700 people taking a big chunk out of our 6,000 person affordable housing wait list, social housing wait list. I'm not clear that's what I heard. I just need to make sure through you. And speaking with staff, are these 700 folks going to be rent geared to income? Are they getting subsidized through any of our programs, or is this going to be open market affordability? Because I say this respectfully, we can do this all day and not put a dent into our social housing. And there's a big difference between rent geared to income and subsidized affordable housing as it's being presented. So just through you, have you talked with any service providers and or staff about potential flow-throughs that might have rent geared to income with a top-up that then gives you the subsidy like we see in some of our other private buildings? I can think in my ward, I've seen them with Sons of Italy and others. Has that conversation happened?
Yes, it has happened once at a meeting at just here on what the department there, what's the person's name? Larry?
That's okay. Larry? You don't have to name staff.
Yeah,
but
so yeah, we had a meeting and it was understood that in case if the gear to income or they don't have enough, then they will be topped up and come as affordable housing. And we would be expecting some sort of a list from the city housing people to say, okay, this could be the potential tenants. So we'd first look at that.
Okay, so it sounds to me like there's still some details because, you know, I appreciate that that's open as an option, but I think there might be some things that we probably need to work through to make sure that that's feasible in the budget, because through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chasm may or may not know how this works, but that money is probably allocated for, which would mean we need more money from the province to be able to do that uptake into your building. Otherwise, it goes to the tax levy, which then puts us right back into that conversation around kind of regressive tax policy and the downloading of, I think, a national housing strategy provincially in here to the municipality. So thanks for that clarity. Those are all my questions.
If I may ask a question, sir.
Sir, you may. Why not?
Okay, thank you. A few weeks back, I read in the local paper as well, and I heard that through the mayor and through the council, there was about $50 million allocated for affordable housing. Any idea what was that for?
So that is $5 million a year. I know the numbers like to sound big, much like your number sounds big over 15 years. It's $5 million a year to go to the upkeep of existing units potentially and some other projects that we're deciding on. And so in that envelope could potentially be incentives. And I'll even go further to say, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Chasm, the rate at which we currently exempt and incentivize private builds downtown, private developments that have no affordability, I'm interested in ending those as well. So, you know, in that space, I think that there is a mix in our toolkit that has the right type of incentives that strikes a balance for private developers and the municipality for some of the things that you're asking for. I'm not clear based on what, you know, this is the first offer, as you know, sir, in the negotiations, and so we'll go back and we'll look at it. But that's not a $50 million upfront. It is $5 million, half of which is already allocated, the other half, which is what we're going to be talking about.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marula, first-time speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the presenter for the information that he's provided. Aside from the numbers that he's presented, and I think I have some concerns with some of the rent numbers that you provided, I think the intent is one that's noble and merited, and ties into a lot of what I was saying with respect to trying to have the private sector buy into it. But I think it's important that we recognize what the market rents truly are, and if a project like this is going to receive public funding, then the proposed rents need to accommodate that incentive. But there are two target audiences. So we do have social housing, but we now have a new target audience, ones that are working, are working, and just can't afford to buy a home. And the tenants of today are not the same tenants that we had 15, 20, 30 years ago. It was far more realistic to get married and save money while you're renting to buy a home. I think those days are basically over in town, as it has been in Toronto and other major centers. So for us to support a project along these lines, we have to try to make that realistic again. So the affordable housing component from a non-social perspective are those individuals who are working, who can't save for a down payment or buy a home, but need an opportunity through a project such as this to make that dream a reality. So I think the intent is great, the framework is fine. My concern is the numbers. I don't think those numbers would lead to providing an opportunity for someone to save money to purchase a home. They're basically, in my opinion, they're more market rent than they are proposed affordable. So if you can tighten up those numbers and ensure that those numbers are more reflective of providing opportunity, I think we can move forward. So I just wanted to basically emphasize that today. And I appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I may just, sorry, if I may just
Sure.
give you some information, sir. As I mentioned, the CMHC has come up with new criteria. for affordable housing rents as well. And in the latest criteria for private developers, if they're going for affordable housing, and if they go 10% below the market rents, which are higher than the city housing rents recommended, 10%, then they will give almost 100% financing, CMHC. So CMHC knows that to maintain, like to get the rents, like, lower rents, they have even bumped up the criteria for that, and they are saying that if developers come with 10% below the market rents, which is the appraisal done, okay, then they will give up to 100% financing.
Thank you very much.
And on that point,
sure, Councilor
Mr. Chairman, and that's fine, but I'm saying an amazing Hamilton solution that I'm proposing is that we go 20% in order to make that dream of affordable housing or purchasing a home reality again. And I'm asking you to be part of that solution if you want my support, and that's basically all I'm saying.
Well, I think the city housing rents are already about 20% below the market.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Councillor Green has requested third-time speaker, and I'm willing to grant it. Councillor Green.
I appreciate the latitude, Mr. Chair. You allowed him to ask questions, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation.
Me too.
It's very important, Mr. Chair, because Hamilton is, Councilor Merulla is quite right. And in fact, the reference to reports of rental markets from CMHC currently has the average rent for studio apartments as being $673. The average rent for one bedrooms being $869. So there is a bit of a discrepancy, and I appreciate Councilor Merulla for bringing that forward. And I would urge Mr. Chasm to go back to those CMHCs that are Hamilton specific. But again, if I could, just through you, Mr. Chair, to make the statement that this idea, we have defaulted to a private sector's notion of what affordability is. And today's affordability is yesterday's luxury accommodation. And it's not in a 5-year or a 10-year gap. It is almost year over year. And so we're seeing these 2006 numbers where, a studio apartment was $673. Now, folks are lucky if that gets them a room. And so I would like, in this report, if we could also have in the staff report back that comes through Councillor Farr's motion. Actually, I'll wait until he moves the motion, then I'll ask for it to come to be more appropriate.
Okay.
Councillor Green, if you like, I have the CMHC papers here. What the rent that you are saying, this is 2017 base. The rents that you are saying is 50%. 50% of what CMHC is $600. But if you look at here, Hamilton, a bachelor is $845. And we are way below because the city housing on 650 is adding 125%, so which is at 815.
Thank
so
you
it
very
is
much.
below than CMHC that what we are showing.
Excellent.
So this is a paper. If
Madam
you'd like,
Clerk,
I'll leave it with you.
My intention is to entertain a motion to receive the delegation and then go to Councillor Farr's motion. That strikes you as good? Right. So moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Jackson to receive. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Farr, could you please present your motion?
Told you we'd be dickering on.
Oh, and sir, thank you very much for your delegation.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Azim. You're good. Oh. I would move with the seconder, Councilor
Councillor
Merulla,
Merulla, yep.
that the request respecting incentives by Azim Kazim be investigated by the appropriate staff along with any other possible local options that may assist this and other private investment in affordable housing, in the creation of affordable housing. And that staff confirm the timing. Forget that. I'll get that to you. I was just going to have a part B on when the infrastructure bank's coming into play, and I think it's this fall. So just once again, moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Merulla, that the requests respecting incentives by Azim Kazim be investigated along with any other possible local options that may assist this and other private investment in the creation of affordable housing in Hamilton. And if I may very briefly thank, this formalizes what we've been meeting on for some time now. So thank you to Kirsten, and thanks Joe Speiler and Finance and Dave and others who have taken the time, and Kazim for his bona fide interest. He is definitely a developer interested in making a profit, but he does not want to let go of his dream, I would suggest, to create and at least assist in the crisis that is affordable housing in Hamilton and social housing in Hamilton with our wait list there. And somewhere down the road, I hope we can come to some agreement that we could have a report back with the passing of this motion and ultimate ratification of this motion on Wednesday that truly puts us not only in a position to make that dream become a reality, but sets a template for future private investments to help us tackle this crisis. So thank you, and thank you to my seconder, Councillor Marula.
Thank you. Councillor Green, did you indicate a desire to speak?
I'll take it up on another.
Okay. Councillor Marula, go ahead.
Probably we should move that we receive the presentation first. Oh, okay.
All right. So on this motion, I have no further speakers. All in favor? Thank you very much for that motion, Councillor Farr. That is carried. 7.1, we now have a presentation from Shiloh Elmayan, Senior Project Advisor, respecting the Hamilton Urban Indigenous Strategy. Ms. Elmayan, could you please come forward? Welcome.
Okay, bonjour. Papa Say Indigenous Kaz, Hornpain First Nation, Donji. My name is Shiloh Elmayan. I'm a member of the Long Lake 58 First Nation. My family's traditional territory is in the Hornpain area of Northern Ontario, and I'm the Senior Project Manager working on the Urban Indigenous Strategy. Good afternoon to the Chair and members of Council. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that we are on traditional Indigenous lands and acknowledge the Haudenosaunee and Mississauga nations this afternoon. I also wanted to just acknowledge the support so far developed for working on the strategy through Joanne Pryal and John Ario, who aren't here, and Suzanne Brown, and acknowledge the community partners that we have in attendance in the audience today. June is Aboriginal History Month, so this is a lovely time to give an update and share with you what we are doing to develop Hamilton's first urban Indigenous strategy. The reasons why we're developing a strategy actually go back a few years. Council approved a motion in 2015 to develop an Aboriginal justice strategy, which was leading up to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report, which was released later that year. We also look to Our Future Hamilton 25-year vision, which includes key directions on supporting and celebrating Indigenous cultures and Indigenous knowledge among its 6 priorities. And as well, many divisions within the city work on initiatives and projects with connections to Indigenous peoples. And as we move on in the presentation, I'll be highlighting a few of those. It's all too often that we are familiar with the troubling socioeconomic figures and statistics with Indigenous peoples, and unfortunately Hamilton is no exception to these figures. And so I'm sharing some statistics that come through SPRC reports and the 2016 point-in-time count that the city conducted. It's important to be reminded that Indigenous families and individuals do experience greater rates of poverty and homelessness here in the city. The figure that sticks out for me is the 37% of Aboriginal children who live in poverty compared to 21% of children overall. These figures are connected really to a history of Indigenous peoples being displaced from traditional homelands, from their families, from their communities, through government policies and legislation such as the 60s Scoop and Indian residential schools. This is a photo of an Indian residential school. It's actually one of the oldest in Canada, and it's located only 30 minutes down the road from us in Brantford. This is the Mohawk Institute. It was opened around 1831, and it didn't close until 1970. In the history of Indian residential schools, it is estimated that 150,000 children went to these schools across Canada. and it is also estimated that 50,000 of them died while attending these schools. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada undertook an enormous task to document the legacy and the history of these schools through collecting testimony from the survivors of the schools, and it issued its final report. Now I'd like to pause for a minute and just play a short video.
Hello everybody, I'm Murray Sinclair. I'm the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about the issue of reconciliation, something which of course is very important to us here at the Commission, but also is of interest and importance to a lot of people in Canada. One of the things that we at the Commission have discovered is that it took us a long time to get to this point in terms of the relationship between Aboriginal people in this country. 7 generations of children went through the residential schools. And each of those children who were educated were told that their lives were not as good as the lives of the non-Aboriginal people of this country. They were told that their languages, their cultures were irrelevant. They were told that their people and their ancestors were heathens and pagans and uncivilized and needed to give up that way of life to come to a different way of living. At the same time that that was going on, non-Aboriginal children in the non-Aboriginal school systems of this country were also being told the same thing about Aboriginal people. So as a result, many generations of children, including you and your parents, have been raised to think about things in a different way, in the wrong way, in a way that is negative when it comes to Aboriginal people. And we need to change that. It was the educational system that has contributed to this problem in this country, and it's the educational system we believe that's going to help us to get away from this. We need to look at the way that we educate children. We need to look at the way that we educate ourselves. We need to look at what it is that our textbooks say about Aboriginal people. We need to look at what it is that Aboriginal people themselves are allowed to say within the educational system about their own histories. In addition to that, we also believe that what's important when it comes to looking at the way that children are educated is to understand that because it took us so many generations to get to this point, it's going to take us at least a few generations to be able to say that we are making progress. We cannot look for quick and easy solutions because there are none. We need to be able to look at this from the perspective of where do we want to be in 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 generations from now, when we talk about the relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in this country. And if we can agree on what that relationship needs to look like in the future, then what we need to think about is what can we do today that will contribute to that objective. Reconciliation will be about ensuring that everything that we do today is aimed at that high standard of restoring that balance to that relationship.
He says it so much better than I can. The Commission, again, issued its final report at the end of 2015, and in that report had 94 recommendations, which they intentionally called calls to action for all levels of government, for educational institutes, for churches and the private sector to take up. Examples, many of those calls to action are actually directed at municipalities or fall within municipal jurisdiction. Examples of these include training for public sector employees and health professionals, the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the celebration of Aboriginal athletes, to name a few. Many municipalities across Canada have already begun the journey to take up these calls to action. And now for the City of Hamilton to begin this work, we really don't have to start from scratch. We do have many examples that we can build upon. We should acknowledge that we have an Indigenous community here in the city that's, been here for over 40 years to support fellow community members. We have an Aboriginal Advisory Committee that's had a presence for many years, and the city has established partnerships with Indigenous communities on things such as the approach to the federal homelessness funding and the more recent collaboration with the Hamilton Executive Director's Aboriginal Coalition on the Indigenous-led poverty reduction investment. The city also has a record for demonstrating its support for community-led initiatives, such as the recent support for the I Am Committed poster campaign last month. These are just a few examples, but they help us to create that momentum to develop our strategy. And so with this context, let me explain what the strategy is meant to be about. The city intends to develop an urban Indigenous strategy that will identify the city's roles and responsibilities and what actions it can take to build stronger relationships with Indigenous peoples. So for example, it may highlight the city's role as a service provider and what actions it should take to deliver better service to Indigenous residents. Or it may focus on the city's role as an employer and come up with actions regarding training for city staff. So in this way, we'll be able to show through the strategy those actions which are tied to the Truth and Reconciliation's calls to action. And again, with an understanding of the lessons that come out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report and understanding the depth of knowledge that exists within the Indigenous community here, this work is going to be done in collaboration with Indigenous partners. We plan to do this work over 3 phases, and this year comprises phase 1, where we will work with our partners to establish the governance, our guiding principles, we'll review research and understand those calls to action, which should be addressed in the strategy. So by the end of this year, we'll have identified the priority areas and those specific calls to action. Phase 2 will begin next year, and that's when the strategy development becomes more focused. So we'll establish working groups who will take on those priority areas and engage in and consult with the communities on them. And we'll come to an end with their findings so that in phase 3, we'll report back to the community, finalize those findings, and evaluate the process that we've taken throughout phases 1 and 2. So here are some key activities planned for this year. I'll just highlight a few of those for you. So far, we have established our coordinating circle, and that's the committee that's going to monitor our work plan and ensure that the project stays on track. Our partners at this table include representatives from Headache, or the Hamilton Executive Directors Aboriginal Coalition, the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic, and the Hamilton Aboriginal Advisory Committee are also partners. We receive cultural support from staff at the Hamilton Regional Indian Center, and we're currently recruiting for a youth to join this table as well to provide that perspective. Later today, hamilton.ca/indigenous will be launching. It'll be a webpage to get updates on the Urban Indigenous Strategy, and folks can learn about events happening in the community, so we'll keep an updated list of community events. And we have been able to raise awareness and support community events. There's a number of them listed on the screen that will be happening within the next week or 2. We're looking forward to the North American Indigenous Games that are coming to Hamilton in July. And staff from tourism, recreation, communications, and myself have been involved with supporting the games. So we're working right now on how to raise awareness of this event throughout the city, through our many communications channels, and through the city's summer camps programs. And we're also partnering with the Hamilton Regional Indian Center to ensure that Indigenous children here in the city are having access to the games and can cheer their peers on in a great way. And with these events, your support and attendance at them are most welcome and would be fantastic, so we can share information if interested. So that brings me to the end. I'll say thank you, or miigwech in my language, for the opportunity to share this update, and I can answer any questions.
Shiloh, thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to Shiloh. Fantastic work. I know you hit the ground running coming into the community, and certainly it shows in this presentation. I'm very excited that we're going to be launching that website. You have in your statistics is 2011 for the SPRC statistics on Indigenous identified people here in Hamilton. And my question to you is, has there been any efforts and opportunities to revisit those numbers? Because as I understand, a lot of the programming is tied to self-identification, and I feel like, anecdotally through my observation, much of our Indigenous programming is being vastly underfunded because of the general challenge in identifying how many folks are here. So that's my first question.
Through the chair, the figures in my presentation came from an SPRC report in 2015, and I understand they used data from the 2011 National Household Survey. So that was the last census undertaken until the one last year. So the 2016 data hasn't been released yet, to my knowledge. So I suspect that when it does, we will have new information to work with.
And I'm not clear about the actual numbers, but I've been told, again, anecdotally, 16, 17,000, probably closer to 20,000 Indigenous identified people here, including Métis and Inuit. Is that correct? Is that about right?
Through the chair, yeah, I have a similar understanding as well that the census data under-enumerates Indigenous peoples, so it could be much higher than the figures that we're using.
And so that leads me to my next question through you, Mr. Chair. Shaila, when we talk about our proximity to the Haudenosaunee, to the Six Nations of the Grand River, and to the New Credit, Mississaugas of the New Credit, we know that there is a great back and forth traveling of communities at different times in people's lives. They'll move uptown, come, go back. So are we in this strategy really working on strengthening those relationships, both with the elected councils of both communities as well as at the staff level, to ensure that our urban Indigenous communities and our traditional communities on the territories are oftentimes identities shared by the same people? So how do we reflect that in our urban Indigenous strategy here in Hamilton?
Through the chair, you're correct, but also our population is made up of folks from many different nations across the country, but we do have many citizens from New Credit and Six Nations who reside in Hamilton. So actually, we have begun some outreach and opened some dialogue with both First Nations communities. So I've had the opportunity with the chair to visit with both Chiefs Laforme and Chief Hill to kind of introduce the strategy and find ways that maybe we can continue some dialogue and maybe some involvement as we develop the strategy.
I certainly would encourage that. I know I've been in contact with both Chief Laforme and Chief Hill, and I know that the interest around the North American Indigenous Games drew some interest in that. Hamilton kind of was able to capture a large part of that, and perhaps there was opportunities there for us to build on those friendships. So that was kind of my first line of questioning. You'll know, of course, as it was just referenced in the previous presentation, a $50 million investment, $5 million earmarked a year. Staff came through with a recommendation that was $1 million earmarked for Indigenous-led strategies. And at the time, I believe it was Monique who presented. Was it Monique who presented?
I think so.
I asked her a very clear question in terms of her priorities, and if I could paraphrase what she said and not quote her, I'll paraphrase it by saying she believed that it was important to put aside kind of the traditional patriarchal colonial ways of dictating to people in the Indigenous communities how they spend their money, and it was important that in the reconciliation process that autonomy be given to that community. You have listed in your examples that we can build on that collaboration regarding the Indigenous-led poverty reduction investment. Could you perhaps, for the sake of this committee and those present, expand on why you think it's important for the autonomy in this kind of settler colonial context, how the autonomy and the ability for the community to decide for themselves where that money goes is, sorry to lead you, fundamental to this process?
Through the chair, what I can say is that of the lessons learned through all of the work of the Truth and Reconciliation is one of them is that government policies have gone wrong, and in many cases terribly and tragically wrong. And then their calls to action, the calls to action speak to self-determination in different ways, and one of which is adopting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And in that declaration, there are many articles that speak specifically to self-determination in all aspects of life. And the Commission sees that as a framework for reconciliation is the United Nations Declaration.
And I know in my conversations, Mr. Chair, through you to the same parliamentary secretary, when we were on a delegation to the UN, Canada has not formally adopted UNDRIP, have they?
They have. They updated their sign-on last year.
Oh, it was last year?
Yeah, they have, yeah.
Okay, so we're in full accordance of that in terms of what they're saying versus
Through the chair, to my understanding, the federal government has signed on without qualification to the declaration.
Okay.
I can't speak to how it's being implemented. I think my understanding is still being worked on.
Okay, I appreciate that. So just to go on the record again, Mr. Chair, I strongly advocated for, pulled that item out to ensure that we had it looked at separate from the other poverty reduction strategies, which of course had many shareholders, stakeholders present to try to look at the staff recommendations. But of course, for me, my interest at that particular point in time was to ensure that if we could, out of that $5 million commitment, that $1 million a year go to the executive director's coalition of Indigenous-led poverty reduction strategies here in Hamilton. So something I think is very important and underlined here today. Lastly, given where you're at, through you, Mr. Chair, to Shiloh, and now you're firmly settled, you've presented this, we're launching the websites, you have the planning here in front of you in terms of the work plan. What do you think is like well, I guess it's the identification of the municipal calls to action. Have you already uncovered things that this committee can take care of effective immediately that are municipal calls to action that we can just move on? Or is this a process that you want to wait and kind of gradually roll out?
Through the chair, I think what's great about how we've begun this work is that we have the opportunity to get feedback and listen to the community. So I think it makes sense for us to work with our community partners to say, what do those calls to action mean to you? What do they look like when you think about accessing services or your involvements with the City of Hamilton? So we haven't firmed them down. We've definitely looked at the ones that point to municipal jurisdiction, but we're looking forward to that opportunity to get feedback from the community on what it means on the ground.
So I asked that question, Mr. Chair, because I know through speaking with some folks, there are issues even at our own Aboriginal Advisory Committee. They're asking about policy that I know I moved like a year and a half ago. So I'm hopeful that all of this in its entirety, and I mean, you've laid it out already, is clearly communicated, and that we have a list of action items that we've already accomplished here as a city that could be continually updated on the website as well as through the advisory committee, so that folks know that we're actively engaged in the file and we're moving ahead as fast as we can.
Through the chair, thank you for that feedback. We'll take that into consideration.
Thank you.
I have no further speakers. Just before we let Shiloh go, Shiloh, you come to the City of Hamilton richly qualified for your position. Could you just tell us a little bit about your professional experience before you came to City of Hamilton?
Through the chair, thank you. So my background is in public policy, and I've spent some time working in the province after grad school in junior policy positions, and then moved on to Hydro One, where I worked in First Nations and Métis relations as a senior manager. Eventually, I moved into that position, senior manager for Northern Ontario, which involved looking after projects and relationships with over 50 First Nations and Métis communities in the northern part of the province on various transmission and electricity related projects and issues, and was there for a number of years. I've also worked at McMaster University doing employment equity work, so looking at how the workforce can be more equitable and representative of the population. Thank you.
It's a privilege to have you on our municipal workforce. Thank you for being with the city. So, colleagues, a motion to receive this excellent presentation. Councillor Jackson and Councillor Skelly, all in favor? And a motion to receive the report from Councillor Farr and Councillor Marula. All in favor? Wonderful. Thank you very much, Shiloh. See you next time. Colleagues, we are at 8.1. This is CES Report 16-012 Sub A, respecting the Gage Park Family Skills Pump Track, a pilot project. Are there any? Yes. So that is moved by Green, and that is seconded by Councillor Farr. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, if I could just comment that I really appreciate the time that staff has invested in this, from our frontline workers at CUPE to our folks that are working in parks, to the folks that have presented this here before us today. You know, this really for me is, if we're talking about models and templates, this is a model and template around youth engagement and youth-led initiatives where they identified in our community a major gap. And you'll be happy to know that this program, as you see in the report, far surpasses by our wildest dreams any of the original targets to date that we thought in terms of usage. It's also spurred off conversations around how youth are in the park and how they are interacting with the tennis clubs and the lawn bowlers and the community gardens, and it really is, I think, a phenomenal effort by everybody. I know Steve Hasselman, if I could just name one name, has been incredible, just really being hands-on, and I'm just really proud of this project, so much so that on the 25th from 1 to 4, Mr. Chair, we're going to be unveiling a huge mural project that was created by the youth, that they identified graffiti as being an issue in the community, so they wanted to create a safe space for art to be and creativity to be explored. And so we had a phenomenal artist in Leon Robinson facilitate an incredible youth mural, which is going to be unveiled there on the 25th. And so I just want to thank staff for putting this forward. So proud to have this in the community, and I know, yeah, it's going to be amazing. So Sarah and everybody else, you guys rock. Thank you.
Thank you. So all in favor? Carried. 8.2 is CES Report 17-023 respecting Wentworth Lodge, replacement of tub and shower facilities. Questions, discussions? Otherwise, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Skelly, all in favor? Great. 8.3 is CES Report 17-027 respecting the YWCA update. Would staff please provide the relevant overview?
Thank you, through to the chair. On April 10th, the Y came and presented to us, and they had requested some additional money for their transitional housing program that houses 65 women in their facility. At the same time, they did express some concerns with the interactions with our staff. On clarification, and I've expanded on that in the report, staff certainly were meeting with them on a regular basis for, sort of follow-up and verifications around the contracts, et cetera. And of course, they're very involved and actively involved in all the community partnerships. Their concern was more at the lack of sort of strategic directions, particularly at the director level. During the past year, they did meet with a director on 3 occasions, but there was a lag from about February to August, where we didn't have a permanent director of housing for about 3 of those months. So having said that, we have been working very closely with them over the past couple of months, and have spent some time trying to think about ways and strategies to support this program. It's a very important program and plays a really important role in this community. One of the things that you'll see in this report is that I'm recommending some, for your decision and direction, is some temporary funding. We found about approximately $24,000 under one of our capital projects that would align with this. They've also received about $21,000 from the enrichment fund in terms of the grants committee, and an additional request for $60,000 was also tabled at that committee. In terms of the city enrichment grants, there's one category in housing that they were rated and prioritized by a committee as the #1 priority. And so, that pocket of funding in terms of this transitional housing at the Y is very, very highly rated. So that, in essence, is the majority of the report, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Vicky, for that update. So, before I support what's here before us under 8.3, Vicky, I just have a few questions of clarification. On process and meetings, the executive director and one of her managers, as you recall, a few months ago, raised the issue of communication, process, and/or meetings. So, without getting into any kind of a public spectacle, any kind of a tit-for-tat at all today, can you give me a general sense, if you've had, since they were here as delegation, can you give me and the committee a sense that you've had some discussion, conversation, and hopefully a clearing of the air on whatever was possibly in dispute? Mr. Chairman, through you to Vicky, please.
Certainly through the chair, absolutely. We've met with them. I've met with them twice, and Dave additional time, and we've had a few phone conversations. We have a very positive working relationship, and they did say that they felt working with the staff, the staff have been very supportive.
Okay, thank you, Acting General Manager. That's good to hear on a positive note. Secondly, I've had this discussion with the CEO, Denise Christopherson, and this is just only my curiosity, Vicki. On the A part, they're called the YWCA Transitional Living Program. And I thought that term living was kind of not outdated, but had, if you will, peaked maybe 2 or 3 decades ago. And I was curious if they could be more seen in terms of an outright shelter. Mr. Chairman, through you to Vicki, maybe for a comment back, please, on the terminology and definition that, if you will, would maybe strengthen their request down the road. Mr. Chairman, through you to Vicki.
Through you to the chair, in terms of our emergency shelters, the individuals that live there is for a much shorter duration, whereas many of these women do live for, upwards to a year. So therein is the name. It's a transition for individuals from either being homeless or, in a shelter through to having some more permanent housing.
Thank you for that explanation, Vicki. Did the Y take on recently Phoenix Place as well, Mr. Chairman, through you to Vicki? And did we, I'm trying to remember if, because I'm on the CEF fund, the City Enrichment Fund, if we gave them some grant money as well through that, Mr. Chairman, through you to Vicki.
So through the chair, yes, they have assumed responsibility for the Phoenix. In terms of support through the City Enrichment, I'm sorry, I would need to check into that. I don't recall that component being funded through that, but okay. I could double check that. I don't believe it was, but I would have to check.
Is she nodding? I'm seeing some affirmative nods in the right direction.
I would go with what she says.
Good. Okay, so that's positive news as well. So to summarize, Vicki, you're recommending 24.5. You're saying that we did at City Enrichment Fund, the grants committee process, we approved the 21,126. That gives them, if my math is quickly correct, about 46,000. I recall Councillor Marula getting on the table the $60,000 on behalf of Councillor Farr, and that in light of some confusion in the dialogue and the conversation at the grants table, we decided at my request to table matters for the 60,000. If at the grants table, we can't do the 60 here at this ECS table, if that were to be lifted from the table at a future meeting and approved, Vicki, then my math tells me that would give them roughly about 105, 106, 107,000. Is that commensurate with what they've had in the previous year or two? Can you help me understand that as well, Vicki, Mr. Chairman, through you to Vicki?
In terms of the previous year, they had received some transitional money of $60,000 early in that year, and then they received $50,000 from the City Enrichment Fund. It was a one-time through the operating piece of this, whereas this recommendation is through the reserve.
So your 60 and 150 makes 110. If they get today's, if they were to get the 60 lifted from the table and approved, that's about 105, 106, close, almost in the same amount as the one times that you're talking about, the 110. Vicki, I just want to make sure for public consumption, I'm interpreting this correctly, please.
Certainly through the chair, that was my thinking. I'm very committed with my staff to continue to work with the Y, and I think there could be other opportunities for more sustainable long-term funding. But currently within our existing budget, you're going to hear about it in the next report. There's no capacity, but at least this would provide them some support till we can work with them to come up with some solutions.
And lastly, thank you, Vicki. And very last question, Vicki. Thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. My understanding in talking as well to the representatives from their delegation to today, that they were, if you will, pointed in the direction to some degree to City Enrichment Fund as well. Can you confirm that, Vicki, as well, please? Mr. Chairman, through you.
Through the chair, my understanding from talking to Denise is that they're very familiar with the City Enrichment Program and have applied on an annual basis. And so actually last year when they received the $50,000, they did initiate that on their own. And then, of course, they applied again this year for the City Enrichment, of which that component has been approved.
The 21,000, but still pending the 60, though.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vicki. Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to support this here today and eventually back at the grants table at the appropriate time. I'll be happy to lift it, but again, I cannot speak for the rest of the committee. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and certainly looking at the next report and then looking at this report, this is where I just get absolutely lost in terms of how we're going about funding, annualized funding, which is one time on top of one time on top of one time on top of one time. And I'm not clear why it's not in operational. I'm not clear why these decisions aren't made. And I appreciate the comments around shelters versus transitional living. Through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that we're getting away from the shelter system. We know it costs too much money. We understand the Housing First model is the most effective. However, having said all of that, money is not to be found in the City Enrichment Fund's capital reserve for operational. It's a policy. It's a policy I've stood by, and I voted against this when it came to enrichment. I'm probably going to have to vote against this again when it goes back to enrichment, because I just don't think it's appropriate to go to enrichment for this type of funding. And yet here we are in item 8.4, dealing with essentially the same projects and programs that we dealt with last year, one time on top of one time on top of one time. So with all that being said, we have before us $45,000 of funding found through the 21 from the enrichment, 24 from the reserve, if this gets supported today, which I'm happy to support. The ask originally, I think, was like 80K, at least at enrichment. Where, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, where does this program fit in, and why isn't this just put into operational annualized funding instead of 5 years of one time on top of one time and pulling the rabbit out of the hat?
So through the chair, I think, and I will speak more to the next report, and I really appreciate when you read it. I actually think we are lending a little more permanency to the next report, and I will explain that when we get to that in terms of the recommendations. I think that that there are areas, definitely the focus is on Housing First. And you're going to see in the next report how we really prioritize programs where we move people right off the street or right off of shelters into some kind of home. But there still is other realities out there that we're facing with where they don't exactly fall into that category. So there's some new funding called Home for Good. That's right, Dave, yeah, Home for Good. In that, we've submitted for funding, and there is a component that talks about transitional housing. And I think that there is some opportunity to find some more permanent funding through that kind of a program. You know, again, we've just submitted the application in a very general area because there could be other programs within the city that may also apply. So I think that that's what I'm saying. We're also talking to the why, like, is there anything through the LIN? Like, are there any other types of sources of funding? And we're also talking to them is how can we understand even a little bit more what role you play in this continuum of housing? How can we have that program link more closely with the direction around Housing First? But we have permanently, and we continue to permanently fund them about $252,000 by virtue of the fact that it is still a very important program, and it is contributing to decreasing the homelessness.
Well, I can tell you, Mr. Chair, the challenge that I face in terms of hearing feedback that there needs to be strategic direction and support. I'm glad to hear that that's happening now. It's my, and this is not about the YW or any of them as individual organizations, but gosh, to be put in this place in the nonprofit sector where the province and the municipalities aren't aligning on funding, the province changes its course and leaves all these groups behind. We know that from a philanthropic standpoint, they're getting less and less in terms of donations. The costs of everything are going up. So is the strategic direction then out to all of our nonprofit service providers to just check in with the province and tack to whatever way they're going, because at the municipality, we can't continue to keep up with the demand of that layover, that crossover. Like, what conversations are being had at OMSA? Like, how are we going to do this? Because I've been now at this for 3 years, and these shifts are having real impacts on the levy, real impacts on certainly the service care providers, real impacts on our staff, but most importantly, real impacts on the people who are living through this stuff, who are getting shuffled from this place to that place, and now they got to go back to this place. And I just, for the life of me, can't understand why there isn't more harmonization between provincial and municipal policy to make sure these overlaps are dealt with, and to make sure the service care providers stay within their scope of work and not just kind of go to wherever the money is, but stay with what they're doing, stay the course. Like, is it a chicken and the egg? I apologize if I'm just kind of ranting right now, but this is so frustrating. What comes first?
Through the chair, with the federal and provincial homelessness funding, there is a direction around moving towards a system-based model as opposed to individual agency-based programming, moving towards away from a charitable-based service delivery to a justice-based service delivery mechanism. We're not quite there yet, but there is plans in place to work towards that.
Do we know the timelines on that? Like, I appreciate and fully understand we had a federal government who ran 15 years of austerity. I got it. So now we're into sunny ways. What do they got to bring to the table?
Through the chair, we have seen some small increases in investment, but where we're seeing significant changes actually in the policy direction and mandates from the provincial and federal governments around homelessness funding.
Great answer. Always appreciate your thoroughness. Mr. Chair, that's it. I'm off my rant. It sucks to be pitted at an enrichment table where I voted against, based on policy and principles, any deviations from the actual spirit and intent of that program, and yet here we are. So I have to go on the record to say that, because I think that's a fundamental flaw in the way we're doing business. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. Councillor Farr.
Yeah, I've had a few conversations with Councillor Green on just that. He went full circle on the prevailing theme and the turmoil, but I have to appreciate his integrity on the issue. But I equally, or perhaps maybe just a pinch more, appreciate hearing from the speaker previous to Green suggesting that he'll put it back on the floor at the enrichment table, because as a one-time, I'm kind of leaning that way, and notwithstanding truly, as someone who really pushed for the enrichment fund and the committee that followed, sticking to the guidelines. But here, as a one-off case, 78%, Mr. Chairman, is a big number today, because it reflects not only where the Y is for their goal this coming Tuesday for their annual successful Walk a Mile in Our Shoes event, but it also represents the number of people that are currently in the facility that they're raising money for that are victims of violence, all of them women. 78%. So that's where you got to lean on, hopefully, getting creative, thinking outside the box, but at the same time, very much supporting. In fact, a lot of what the previous speaker just said is what I wanted to sort of delve into and ask questions on, so I don't need to now. But it's really important that we don't have to keep trying to be creative, and that we get some consistencies, whether it's Win or Sunny Ways or whomever, so we don't have to have the kind of report that's before us now. And with that, it's not really a negative report. I'm glad. We did have a delegation that came before us. We did move to get some clarity. That's what this is. And so a big thank you to Vicki Woodcox, and an emphasis from what we've heard in her brief statements today and answering other questions, that opportunities for solutions long-term do exist. And then she went on to mention this Home for Good possible funding source. That's really great to hear. I'm sure the Y is pleased to hear that as well. And thank you to Vicki for all that she's done in a short time in meeting with the Y and giving us a summation of what it is we were after not long ago. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the previous speakers, too.
Thanks. Councillor Marula.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as the mover of the motion at committee, I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't go forward, but having said that, at least it's moving in the right direction. Having said that, I think it's important to recognize that we can't just simply have a framework that's written in concrete, in that there's no flexibility, because at the end of the day, that's what the political body's about. We're going to have to deal with inputs, and then the outputs will vary depending on where council or the committee wants to direct the priorities. Because without that type of process, then we might as well just give staff complete authority and not debate any of it. And that goes for everything we do. So at the end of the day, what we did and what we do is deliberate over issues based on inputs and outputs and what we believe is a priority, openly, transparently, and we're held accountable accordingly. So I proudly put forward that motion for a number of reasons, and frankly, it's merited. So it's a little bit, much ado about nothing, but it is our job to actually deliberate over these particular issues and determine what we feel is a priority and make decisions, because that's what we're here to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Second time, Councillor Green.
Thank you. I just need to go on the record to state that at the Enrichment Fund, we hold about a $500,000 reserve, which I was very critical of. And the reason why I was critical of it is because if we're holding money in these reserves, the deliberations that's been spoken about could easily be prevented by having the right type of funding at Community Emergency Services at the departmental level. So when we come back around this table, we're not telling them to go back with 1.8% increases at the department level, because they're quite right. The conversations we have are deliberative and they are political. So if we're prioritizing Community Emergency Services at budget time, we shouldn't bring forward a budget that asks them to basically take a lower increase than the actual rate of inflation, which is essentially an austerity budget. So at the next time we get around the table to have the conversation with budgets, then I'll look forward to having support for full funding for these programs so we don't have to find the rabbit out of the hat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no further speakers. May I please have a motion to approve the report? So, Councillor Farr, Councillor Marula, all in favor? Sure. That is great. 8.4 is CES report. Oh, and by the way, just before we move on, a big thank you to Denise Christofferson for her advocacy, and to all of the workers of the YWCA for providing a much needed service. I hope it's clear that we think your work is fantastic, and I hope we can find the money to make your work sustainable soon, one way or another. So on behalf of the committee, thank you. 8.4 is CES report 17-030, respecting the investment plan for Chippy homelessness funding. Would staff please provide a relevant overview? We'll just, I think a little overview would be a good thing. So staff, could you please provide? Indeed. So staff, please.
Okay, through the chair. Thank you. So this is our report, and it's all about our homelessness funding, and we've referred to it as Chippy. And this is the funding that provides a variety of programs, from our emergency shelters to our residential care facilities to some of our homelessness programs. And we have approximately $22.9 million in terms of funding for this. Now, this report is basically saying that we are, in essence, maintaining primarily a status quo, which is probably some of the frustration, perhaps, that Councillor Green has raised. We haven't received a lot of additional money over this past year. It's about $190,000. And so we had to look very carefully at all parts of this program to make some decisions on how to fund it for the next couple of years. So what we did is we did get approval and direction to put some programs in place as pilots to assist with helping with homelessness. And they were approved as of December 2015, and we have been funding them on a temporary basis. And those pilots are the ones at the beginning of your recommendation. So there's the Native Women's Mountain View, there's the Families First, and there's a rapid rehousing. And the focus on those is a lot about, just as the councillor's saying, it's moving people directly from the emergency shelters into homes, which is one of the directions that we're going. So what we have been able to do is confirm permanent funding through to March 2019. So that doesn't sound great because it's not 100% permanent, but I can tell you that there's a very high likelihood that that will continue after that time. It's just that that's when the renewals with our contracts are up, so we can't commit beyond that. But my experience has been that we generally continue to with funding in those areas. So my hope would be that it will extend past that, but the direction here is just till the end of March. So those 3 programs were prioritized the highest with the work group that evaluates all of the proposals that come forward. The other one that was rated along with the 3 pilots is the housing stability benefit. That's a big budget of about $6.2 million that helps individuals with their first and last month rent and also for rental arrears. Now that program, you may recall, I'm sure you all recall, is last fall it was starting to escalate at a pace faster than what we had expected. And we did generate a communication that we would need to stop a few of our programs under that to maintain our costs within that. We did put a work group committee in place, made a few changes administratively and streamlined it, and we managed by the end of the year to only be over by 50,000. And we were forecasting it could be upwards to $1 million. We are continuing to look at that and looking at criteria, et cetera. And so the only change that we've made in this report is we've decreased the 6.2 million stability down to about by 170,000. We believe we can contain it within that, and we're going to watch that very carefully. We have looked at other municipalities, and there's some additional things we offer that if we do start to get into financial challenges, we could probably stop those. But at this point, we're carrying exactly the same benefits to the same individuals, but we forecasted slightly less in the budget. The emergency shelters are recommending we carry on just as we have in the past, and the same with the RCFs. The only thing with the residential care facilities, which we will continue on, is a wait list. There had been interest and a request, from the providers to not have a wait list, but in essence, like right now, there's 50 people on that wait list, and if we were to subsidize those 50 people, it would be additional $750,000, which we don't have. But the good news is, again, that the staff are looking at those wait lists very carefully. There's about 21 that are waiting right now, and the other 30 of the 50 couldn't go into the residential care facility anyway. They're either in hospital or they're not ready to go in there. And right now, we're finding the average wait is about 1.5 months. So it isn't a really long wait. So in essence then, this is a report that maintains most of the existing programs. It does confirm permanency to the 3 pilots until March 2019. And I'm more than happy, along with my esteemed staff here, to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you. And I know, if you could just for a moment, the stability benefit, what types of things does that provide for people?
Through the chair, that provides last month's rent, assistance with utility arrears, rental arrears, and other items.
So is that's on top of, we have a portable subsidy. I think we did $800,000 for a portable rent subsidy in the last year. This is aside from that. My question to you is on the $800,000 portable subsidy. Are we tracking how that's working, and when will that be reported back on? Because we're having these conversations around the table about what tools are working in the housing strategy and what ones aren't. And I have raised some concerns around the upward artificial pressure on what we're calling affordability, because we're allowing the average market rents to determine what's affordable and not wages, Ontario Works, and ODSP, which should be what it's anchored to, something that's a little bit more realistic for people's lived experience. So how are we tracking the top-ups?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Councillor. So that program is the Municipal Housing Allowance Program that I think you're referring to, which started last year. And we are tracking it, and we could bring information forward through individual information report for committee to update on what's happening in that program. We're on schedule as a division to providing an overall update in the fall in any case, but we can bring that one forward if that's deemed advisable. We are looking at who's receiving the fund, the housing allowance, how we're making it available, and we are essentially fully spent in that program.
I appreciate that, and by way of direction, Mr. Chair, I would like to ask for that information report to come back, because I mean, it's quite right. We're balancing, you know, such a tight budget, and the decisions that we make are so important. And I'm not clear, based on the work that I've done, Mr. Chair, and my research on housing and economics, that we're necessarily incentivizing the right things. And my concern is that as we continue to incentivize in some directions, we're actually pushing the market up artificially with some of these subsidies. And I'm very curious to look at what that mix looks like, how it's working, how many people it's serving, because if it comes back, Mr. Chair and members of this committee, that we're not having the impact, the bang for the buck, so to speak, and we have these folks who are at the front lines of critical housing, the most vulnerable people, then let's revisit that $800,000 and let's look at ways we can have, you know, big impacts on people's lives versus, you know, lining the pockets of private developers, and in some cases, in my opinion, some of the irregulated market rents where they're not fire safe, they're not building safe, and they have all other types of issues. So those are my concerns. I know through you, Mr. Chair, to Vicky, well documented. I've been very vocal, both online and offline, about the direction that we're taking the commodification of people's existence in this city. So thank you for allowing me to ask that question. It ties in because we're making those decisions one-to-one on how we're allocating in this department. Thanks.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on 8.4. Councilor Merulla has moved. Councilor Green, if you'll second. All in favor? Carried. Great. 8.5 is report HVC 17-001 respecting revised terms of reference for our Hamilton Veterans Committee. Any questions or discussion? Otherwise, Councilor Jackson, Councilor Merulla, all in favor? Carried. May I please have a motion to approve item 11.1 regarding changes to our outstanding business list? Farr and Skelly, all in favor? Motion to adjourn from Councilor Green, seconded by Councilor Jackson, all in favor? Carried.